Hello, I'm David Hepworth. Thanks for clicking this word in your ear, the latest of hundreds of chats Mark Allen and I have had over recent years, some between ourselves and others with musicians, authors, comedians, and other people we like. If you'd like to help make sure they continue, you might consider being a Patreon supporter by visiting patreon.com/wordinyourear, or just by liking or subscribing in whatever way you prefer. On with the show.
You're listening to a podcast from The Word.
So here we three are again, The Word podcast, resuming after our summer break. And I think the last time we spoke, it was Alex and it was me and Alex actually, and we were talking about the likelihood of an Oasis reunion. And what do you know? As soon as we come back from our holes, it actually happens, and it happens pretty much as Alex predicted. Yeah, you're rather pleased with yourself, aren't you, Alex?
I'm a little bit smug about that, yeah. I'm not going to lie. Maybe they're both listening to the podcast. Who knows?
It could be.
And that's what inspired them to get back together.
So, just first of all, reminders. We're going to talk about Oasis and all things reunion this week, because it's clearly a phenomenon far bigger than Oasis. The whole appeal of reunions. Tell us how they came to kind of break up and what brought them back together, Alex. Tell us that, just to bring us up to date.
Well, as far as I can gather, it was the end of a long tale of... I remember a few years ago I was watching the Supersonic documentary, and there was a great sentence in it where there was an old tour manager or something that said, the problem with this band was Noel's got 1,000 buttons and Liam has 1,000 fingers. And I think it was the end of a very long tale of Liam habitually pressing those buttons for years and years and years and years. And I think they had this big bust-up pre-show in Paris, and
involving a plum.
Liam threw a plum at Noel, and then Noel stamped on Liam's guitar.
A plum. That's the final straw, isn't it? A plum.
Yeah, you know it's over.
When someone throws a plum at you,
that's it.
There's no going back.
Game over. Noel storms out, having being absolutely mortified that his own flesh and blood would throw a piece of fruit at him, and thus ended Oasis after 15 years.
And how long ago was that?
Apparently,
how long ago was that?
That was 2009. So they've been together for 15 years. It's been 15 years now since they split up, which I find really hard to comprehend, that Oasis now have been away from existing for as long as they were together. I just can't quite reconcile that in my head.
Well, Dave and I were talking to an old pal of ours, Phil, the other day, and he was saying that, that they formed in definitely maybe it was 1994, which was 30 years ago. 30 years before that, 1964, when he was born. So he said half his life Oasis had been there, and yet it seemed like only yesterday. I know we have this conversation all the time, but it's so true, isn't it? It just seemed only yesterday that they formed.
I think one of the things with Oasis is they've never really fallen out of the public either, have they? I mean, they are habitually in the news for something still. And I think that's the thing. They've never really kind of disappeared from our... Well, Noel and Liam have never disappeared from our consciousness, really. The tabloids have always got photos of them on holiday, even when they haven't got records out. They're always
because it's interesting. This is one of the points, isn't it? That I think we were exchanging WhatsApps or whatever about this earlier this week. That I was saying, surely they are the last really big band. And you said, I think, Alex, you said, well, there's Coldplay, and Coldplay are clearly enormously popular and post-date Oasis, don't they? But my comeback to that is Oasis were surely the last band who would make the lead item on the news or on the front page of what used to be called a tabloid newspaper. Do you know what I mean? In the sense that they're absolute household words in a way that I don't think Coldplay are. Am I justified in believing that? What do you think?
I think you're right, because there is always a hint of catastrophe around Oasis, and that's what made them interesting to people who didn't necessarily like music. Whereas Coldplay don't really do anything, do they?
I suppose
also Coldplay, even people who really like Coldplay can't necessarily name more than one member of the group, which is always an indication that you haven't completely connected with them. It's just a sound that you happen to like.
They're certainly less group-like, aren't they? Yes. So with Oasis, there is an accompanying drama, isn't there? Probably more than any other band, actually.
Oh, I think so. I was thinking that my parents were aware of Oasis and weren't aware of virtually any other group at the time.
Weren't aware of Blur. But
they wouldn't have been aware of Blur, but they were aware of Oasis. I think a lot of that was a parallel with the Beatles in a way. There was a geographical connection. They were about Manchester in the way the Beatles were about Liverpool. They were about a particular look, and they were about a particular attitude. And they were aware of all that. They knew this was the group where the two brothers were always fighting. Right. And their popularity was just immense, wasn't it? And I think I've got another theory about this, and I think the 90s was almost exactly a parallel to the 60s in terms of the people who lived through it think of it as an absolute golden age now. And the people who are too young to live through it kind of want to go back to that.
Well, yeah, that's the thing we'll come to, I think, because I think that's very interesting.
But there was I think it's just like the 60s. I think it was that optimism. There was that kind of the boom in the British arts. There was the prosperity. There was music, fashion, film.
Change of government.
Yeah, exactly. There was you felt that Britain was the centre of the world, which actually it wasn't in this case.
It wasn't
quite parochial. No, it wasn't. But there was Train Spotting, it was Hugh Grant, it was Damien Hirst. My sons look back at Britpop and Blur and Oasis and Supergrass and Pulp and also Nirvana and Green Day and Blink and all that, and they think of that as being the last great communal age where everyone got together and united. I think there's an element of that. Actually,
I happened to catch a cricket podcast only yesterday, I think, where former England cricket captain Michael Vaughan and former England player Phil Tufnell, they were about to talk about the Test match, and they couldn't resist talking about Oasis. And the presenters said, and Michael Vaughan was going, well, Britain's greatest band. And the presenter was going, what, better than the Beatles? Michael Vaughan going, yes. And I thought, come on, for God's sake. Michael Vaughan.
How did he defend that?
Nobody sought to make him defend it. It's like we all looked away for fear of embarrassing him by dwelling on it further. But clearly it's a generational thing. Like you're saying, Mark. It's all to do with what age you are, isn't it? Alex, what were you going to say?
Well, first of all, actually, my first introduction to the Beatles was via a friend that I was kind of a big Oasis fan with, and he gave me a cassette of the anthology, the Beatles anthology, and I remember listening to it, Take 37 or Strawberry Fields or whatever. I remember thinking to myself, I prefer Some Might Say. And I now look back at this and think, I do recognise that I was probably a little bit misguided, but I think it was a generational thing. I mean, for me, I was in school when Oasis were at their peak, and it just felt so intoxicating. I mean, it was I always think these things aren't about the thing themselves; they're about the things that surround them. So, for the Beatles, for example, I've got this theory that they were fantastic, but also they were at the epicenter of so many other things, like the end of the Second World War, kind of the change in the power dynamic between young people and older people, changes in thinking, all that kind of stuff. They kind of embodied that whole thing. And Oasis, for me, were at the center of just all these worlds colliding, being a hormonal teenager, getting into girls and music and going out and all this kind of, and becoming interested in escaping, like, boring village life in Warwickshire, all these things. They embodied kind of why I was feeling the way I was. And I always felt at their very epicenter, away from the bad behavior and even the songs, their message was ultimately really, really aspirational. Noel never made any, he was never shy about telling you how hard they worked and how many songs he'd written before they'd recorded their first album, and and that really spoke to me, you know. And I just thought, well, if I really work at learning the drums, for example, maybe I can do something with this as well. And that was a really, really powerful message. And I don't think any other band were really doing that. They were all kind of too ensconced in their own kind of little scene thing, you know, like Suede and Blur. They never really spoke to like the heart of people. I don't.
Well,
think
I
like
suppose
Oasis
it's an interesting point, isn't it? And Noel Gallagher particularly has what earlier generations would have called the common touch. You know what I mean? You can put him on any radio, TV program, and he will say something that people will remember because he speaks people's language. You know what I mean? Which nobody ever accused Damon Albarn of doing. You know what I mean?
He's very, very funny too. Very funny, very original thinker, very clever.
Yeah, yeah. So going back to Oasis, so they break up, and whatever you said, whatever year you said, what have they been doing since, Noel and Liam, broadly?
Well, Liam went straight out of the traps with Beady Eye, which was basically Oasis minus Noel. It was literally all the members of the last incarnation of Oasis.
I love the way you call them Beady Eye, not Beady Eye.
Is that how you say it?
Which Rolling Stone?
Yes, yes.
Fleetwood Mac.
Yes. Go on.
I've always heard them in my head as Beady Eye. I don't know why, but anyway, it was Oasis without the talented one, you know, which was, you know,
Oasis without the trouble, isn't it? Really,
yeah. And they were pretty terrible, but they catered to something, you know, and then they folded after a little bit. And then I think Noel bided his time, and he, I think, waited a year or so before forming the High Flying Birds. And the first album, I think, was essentially all the songs that he'd planned for the next Oasis album, but now would never be on it because there wasn't going to be another Oasis album. And it seemed, I think if you're a betting man, you'd have put money on the notion that Noel would have kind of won the war. But Liam, I think he got rescued by his wife. He lost his way a little bit and went off the rails. And his wife, who is also his manager, basically told him to sort his life out because he had a great solo career.
Which wife are we talking about?
Debbie Gwyther. So I think they met. She used to work at Creation, and I think they met. They're friend from work, and
they met at work.
Yeah.
Office romance.
But she and her sister Katie, I think, essentially masterminded his re-emergence into the public eye as a solo artist. Surrounded him with, you know, some really fantastic songwriters who knew exactly how to cut to the essence of who he was, and cater to the people that loved him the most, you know, and just sent him out there again. And I went to see his band in, I think 2018. And Noel was doing his own thing by this point. High Flying Birds were a different proposition to Oasis. For a start, it was a multi-gendered band, which Oasis would never have been, right?
No, that's a very good point.
No, true.
It was a blokiest band with a
not on brand at all.
Yeah. So and musically, they're you know, Noel had now become an artist, which was never the case when Oasis were alive. I don't think really. But Liam was playing his own stuff, but also his set was heavily peppered with,
Oasis,
I would say, the cream of the first couple of albums, plus the master plan, the B-sides out, all the stuff. And
presumably all the stuff that got the best response on stage was, I'm now going to do Live Forever kind of
absolutely thing. But the interesting thing was, so Noel was doing the odd one, and it was played, and those songs had matured with him, if that makes sense. So they changed, the arrangements had changed, you know, they were kind of different beasts. But Liam played those songs exactly as they sounded on those records.
But also only he can make them sound like they sounded on the records because he's the guy who sung them.
It's true.
It's that classic thing, isn't it, that no matter what Noel does, unless it's the songs that Noel actually sung,
that's true.
Then look, you know, Wonderwall or whatever, then
so
you know, it's just not going to sound right.
It's really interesting because it's like Robbie Robertson and Levon Helm in the band, isn't it?
Yeah.
Robbie Robertson wrote the songs, but he wasn't the voice of the band, was he?
But it seemed that Liam was selling more tickets than Noel all of a sudden, and
Right.
younger kids were coming to his shows all of a sudden, and he'd kind of become this man of the people in the way that Noel used to be in the 90s. The
Right.
tables had turned. I was always on Team Noel when I was a kid because Noel, to me, seemed like the underdog. All the attention was focused on Liam, and Noel was the brother who wasn't handsome. Do you know what I mean? He wasn't like star material, but he
wrote all the songs.
He wrote the songs, but
he didn't get so much of the credit for it.
But he still felt like a bit of an underdog somehow. But then all of a sudden Liam was the underdog because Noel got off to a racing start with this new career, and Liam was a mess, frankly. And then all of a sudden he wasn't, and he was singing these songs that just soundtracked your youth in the way that you remember hearing them. And all of a sudden he became this, I don't know, this man of the people, the underdog.
So the case is really, ironically, that kind of what this reunion means. Noel rejoining Liam rather than Liam rejoining Noel.
I think kind of is, because I didn't see any sign of Liam's career faltering down.
But surely Liam must have got to the point where he thinks, I can't get any bigger than I am. It's not that he isn't big, he's huge. Those Nebworths, weren't there? I mean, he's enormous, but he just can't get any bigger unless he brings Noel in.
I don't think he can, but also he's never made any secret of his desire to get Oasis back together. In fact, he's been angling after this whole time, and Noel's always been the one that's been brushing.
Well, as you were speculating, only whatever it was, 10 days ago when we recorded that thing, was you said eventually the money will get too great, and they will do it while their mother is still with us, to please their mother. You've met their mother, Mark, is that right?
I met their mum. My wife and I, we were talking about this only yesterday. Claire and I went to the launch of What's the Story Morning Glory, which was in 1995. It was a breakfast, bizarrely. What a very unwise idea for Oasis. A breakfast in a very posh Knightsbridge hotel. I can remember it so vividly. We got there roughly on time. And for about half an hour, we were the only people there, apart from Peggy Gallagher. And we talked to Peggy Gallagher the entire time. She was fantastic. She must have been about, I suppose, 52 years old.
Oh, really?
It was the second time in her life she'd been to London. She talked non-stop about what the boys were like growing up. It was so interesting. And without any kind of notion that I was a journalist or I might reproduce any of this, which I never did actually, but
just a proud
she said
mother.
It was just very, very difficult. She said 3 boys physically fighting the whole time. She said I was just in despair. She was telling us, total strangers, telling us all these extraordinary stories about them. And then at one point she looked up, and in the middle of the room, this is so 90s, was what we used to call an ice sculpture, which was a block of ice moulded with the title of the album, What's the Story, Morning Glory, at the top of it, very slowly melting. I remember she turned to me and she said, "What's that?" And I paused for a while. I was thinking, I don't really know how I can describe. I felt kind of really embarrassed, as if I was somehow responsible, not to talk it up and try and justify it. But I felt this. I said, "Well, it's an ice sculpture." And she said, "What does it do?" And I said, "Well, it's the name of the record in ice, and it very slowly melts."
It melts.
And she said, "Why?" I thought, all these are really good questions that just don't really have an answer. Then she said, "Isn't that a bit of a waste of money?" And I thought, yeah, well, it probably was, As we hooked down our kedgeree and our Bucks Fizz at 12 o'clock, I can remember that no member of the band turned up for an hour and a half. And when they did, they'd clearly been up all night. It was just a terrible mistake to a breakfast too.
So why?
But anyway, she was fantastic. And I think, and you said this on the podcast when I was away that week, Alex, that you thought she was one of the motivating factors. And I'm sure you're absolutely right, because she has made it so clear to them over the years that they ought to patch it up. I mean, how would you feel as their mother to see this very public spat? Every time you met anybody in the street, they would say to you, "Oh, your brothers, have they made it up?" And it must be heartbreaking too to see them still fighting.
So what's the importance of Noel's marital difficulties, divorce, and so forth in all of this? What's the state of it? Who's our divorce correspondent here?
Well, I could be quite cynical and suggest that this has got a lot to do with it, because the timing does seem quite uncanny. I think this was, as far as I'm aware, this reunion the dotted line was signed around a year ago, which tracks as I think Noel's divorce was in January 2023, which suggests that there was 6 to 9 months of talking about it before the deal was finalised.
But are we to believe that Noel Gallagher, having previously, did he marry Meg Matthews?
Yeah, he did.
And divorced. Presumably went through one expensive divorce. Are we to believe that he got married again without a prenuptial agreement? Which suggests he believes a lot more in true love than you would have thought. Wouldn't it really? Did he do that?
Well, he must have done, because, I mean, the figures being banned, whether you can believe them or not, I don't know. There's an £8 million mansion in Hampshire and there's a £20 million settlement, which I suppose might be true in that these divorces tend to be half that person's earnings when you're married to them. Because this is pretty much what happened to Bruce Springsteen, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So I suppose it could be, and I suppose he is $20 million down on the deal and therefore does need the money.
But also, interestingly, I think Noel's ex-wife and Liam had a huge falling out. And this was one of the things that deepened the rift, apparently. So, right. Out the picture, maybe,
Actually, to be fair, slight tangent here. I think members of bands not getting on with other members of bands' partners' wives is a bigger story in the breakup of bands than we think. You know what I mean? It's very often not talked about, but it's very often actually the case. There is a wonderful thing, I think I've mentioned this before, there's a really good book about Tom Petty, written by Dan Zanes.
Oh, I remember you talking about this.
Dan Zanes goes on the road to Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. And at one stage, Mike Campbell and Stan Lynch, I can't remember who says it to who, but basically in the course of one of these bus stops, one of them says, "And I hate your wife." And you think, there is no
going back from that.
No going back from that.
You can't turn around and say, I didn't mean it.
You can say,
turn around and say, I was drunk. Sorry about that.
You can say, I hate you. That's kind of all right. Yeah. That's the standard, rough and tumble of being in a band. But if you say that about somebody's partner or wife, my God, there's no coming back, And so,
but you're saying, Maggie, you're saying that Liam didn't get on with Noel's wife. Is that right?
Yeah.
But why would that? The impression we get is that Noel and Liam didn't see each other for 15 years anyway.
I think.
How could that affect things?
I think it was. I'm not entirely sure what happened. I think there were some phone calls exchanged at some point. Yeah.
Right.
I think this might have been during Liam's drinking quite a lot phase during the breakup years.
I can believe this stuff, Mark. Yeah. Actually, the number of times people I know who are not musicians where there's, why does so-and-so not get on with so-and-so? It's because of something somebody's husband said about somebody during a phone call 5 years ago or whatever. And there's
3 o'clock in the morning.
Absolutely. And there's no going back whatsoever. I want to talk for a moment about this cliche that's bandied around, in the last week. They don't need the money. I put it to you, everybody always needs the money. Why do we talk about rock stars as if they're any different from us? So anybody, be they a bank manager, a hacker, a car mechanic, a rock star, if somebody comes along to you at the age of whatever age these guys are, 59, is that what they are? I don't think they are.
No, a little bit below that. Noel's 57, Liam's 52, I think.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, in the 50s. And say, all the money you've made up to now, well, you can make it all again tomorrow. Would you like that? I would suggest 99% of people on God's earth are going to say yes, aren't they?
But it's the question. It's not just a question whether you need the money; it's whether you want the money. I mean, I don't know very many very wealthy people but they would all tell you, and they've all told me, that no matter how wealthy you are, you always think that life could be massively improved by being a little bit more wealthy.
It's true.
Because then you've got an option. You could help open the wing of the hospital, or you could go and buy an island somewhere, or whatever. But the point is, you could do it. It's an option, and that option isn't there if you don't get out in the bed that morning and go out and work some more to earn it. So I can't see why they wouldn't earn it at all.
And also,
absolutely.
in general, aren't these people's lifestyles, generally proportionate to the amount of money they earn?
I think you're right. I think
there's the fear of, we've had this conversation a million times about the Stones, is that fear of downsizing, isn't there?
Yeah.
Is that Mick Jagger doesn't want to wake up one morning and only have 4 mansions around the world instead of 5, and be living his life in a slightly more restricted way, because that feels as though you're on some kind of decline. And I can really understand that.
I'm sure
Why wouldn't they want the money? I mean, also there's just so many other factors involved. That the feeling of going out there on stage, hearing the roar of that crowd, would be incredibly attractive, I think.
Oh, definitely.
Also, I've got another theory. My other theory is about the money is that they're in a position to make an enormous amount of it by doing the least amount required. And my theory is that this is the easiest stadium gig to put on, because once you fill a stadium, you're normally required to add to that experience through the medium of spectacle. So it's got to be props, it's got to be backdrops, it's got to be lasers, it's got to be light shows, it's got to be films.
They're probably not going to have dancers on this tour, are they?
No, I don't. There's going to be no choreography. If you think about it, this is the least kind of active stage act I think I've ever seen in my life. I've only seen Oasis once. They were really, really good. It was very, very early on when the first album came out. And they're completely motionless. Noel Gallagher, when he plays those lead guitar solos like Live Forever, which he plays absolutely note for note, staring at his fretboard, looking like he's worried he isn't going to get it right, is absolutely motionless. His brother, at that point, whenever he played a solo, would pick up a can of Stella and just sit on the drum riser and floor cans of lager while the solos went on, and then get up. So there's no choreography, there's no movement. They don't have to get fit for this. Any group will talk about having to go to the gym or just get physically ready for it. They don't have to do any of that. They don't have to change the way they look. The whole point of an Oasis concert is it is a mass communal sing-along.
Yeah.
It's as many people as possible, dressed identically, being teleported back to a moment in their life when they were probably happier, actually, and life seemed more prosperous, and they're singing those songs. They don't even have to change tempo, actually. They don't even have to play fast songs because they haven't got any. And here's one more point. Sorry, I've been thinking about this. Here's one more point. It's the other thing that people usually bring into the mix when they're playing a stadium show to ring the changes, is they bring on celebrity guests. Well, everybody kind of hates Oasis, which I think is quite attractive, actually. I rather admire them for that because they don't appear to care. You know what I mean? And so who would they bring on? They'd bring on Paul Weller. They might bring on Ian Brown. They might bring on John Squire.
Paul McCartney.
They might bring on that bloke from the Ocean Colour scene. If they were very lucky, they'd get McCartney or they'd get Ray Davies. But otherwise, I don't think they can rely on a string of people to come in and shake it all up, because I don't think they have that. They might bring on Damon Albarn as a work of complete genius. That would be really clever, but I don't know if he'd do it, So I don't know. It's a very, very simple. If you went to an Oasis show at Wembley Stadium and there were no props, there was no, what do they call it, thrust stage? They call it thrust stage.
The vanity ramp.
You've got a lip where you go out to the middle of the audience. And there wasn't one of those, which there won't be, There wasn't any choreography. There were no dancing. There's no extras. There's no backdrops, lasers, props, anything. No spectacle, no fireworks, no whizz-bangs. Would you be disappointed? No. No, you wouldn't be. Even if they didn't play very well, it doesn't really matter. You just want to hear them doing live together. You want to see the two boys back together in some semblance of brotherly love. That is all it is.
That's the thing. I'm going to plug my book here at this point.
Yeah.
I Hope I Get Old Before I Die, which comes out next week, strangely enough.
Yeah.
And one of the things I read about in there is that bands reunited, huge part of the value is just seeing them walk on stage.
Yeah.
It's not what they do. It's there they are. There's my 14-year-old heroes who used to be on my bedroom wall. There they are in their 50s. And oh, look, they're touching each other or whatever. And for a moment, I feel my imperfect life has been repaired. And the whole thing about bands reforming is nothing to do with music at all. It's entirely to do with symbolism. It's repairing your life. It's bringing something back for you. And the fascinating thing to me, and the thing I've been surprised about in the week since, less than a week since this was announced, because I always thought, they'll announce 2 shows and then they'll option about 10 others and then they'll slot them in depending on how fast the 2 go. Well, they've already added further shows, haven't they, Alex?
Yeah, they announced, was it 14? There was 3 more.
Yeah.
And there are clearly going to be more after this, possibly, because they've got,
100%.
if you look at each date, there's 3 or 4 days after the end of that last date when there's, when they're not playing.
You see, and this indicates a level of public demand which almost becomes a sickness. That if there are that many people prepared to spend that much money on the prospect, the promise of something that, let's not forget, is not going to happen for a full year, is absolutely staggering. And on one hand, I'm hearing about cost of living crisis. And on the other hand, people are throwing hundreds of pounds at something that they're not going to get the product of for a year's time. Alex, you're one of these people seeking to do this, aren't you? Tell us about how that's working.
Isn't Oasis ticket now technically a utility bill? So it fits in, doesn't it? But I'm on the ballot. I got an email this morning telling me that I've succeeded in a pre-sale ballot, so I can now be considered for the pre-sale. So this is a stage.
And you told us you weren't going to go.
How rock and roll is that?
I know.
I'm in the ballot.
You said you didn't want to see them hobble on. Middle-aged men.
I did, but they hadn't quite reformed then, and now they have. I've had a meeting with myself.
You see, this is one of the great.
Yeah.
It's one of the great truths. Do you know what occurred to me only yesterday, actually, and reflecting. Mark and I often reflect on our great age. You know, one of the great compensations of old age is you get past FOMO. You no longer feel that. You no longer. You think anything I wanted to see. I've seen it really, and I've probably seen it when he was better. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, what's fascinating in the week since the Oasis announcement is seeing the indications of people just feeling the anxiety already that they're not going to be there. That's just ridiculous, isn't it?
Well, it's
all these people who booked hotels in the cities where they might have been playing because they'd reckoned that around then might be the date, and then been told that the hotel thing's been cancelled because they've taken it off the market and put it back on the market at 4 times the price. All that anxiety is just, how can you imagine living with that?
So if you get a ticket, Alex, how much is it going to cost you?
I think the basic level tickets are in the region of 150 quid.
150 quid.
Yeah.
So a load of people are going to spend 150 quid in the next month or so. And that money's going to sit where for the next year? Do we know?
In the pockets of Noel and Liam Gallagher. In the deep, deep pockets of Noel and Liam.
That's surely there is the chance that between then and now, something's going to go wrong. There's going to be a falling out or whatever. What do we think about that?
Eamon Ford, our old pal, was quoted in The Guardian the other day talking about how they must have the most amazingly watertight contracts and also crippling insurance to ensure that nothing can go wrong. There has to be something to dissuade them from stepping aside from this once it's up and running with that amount of money involved.
Because you've already got the money, haven't you?
Yeah, That's the other thing, is that money's sitting in a bank account somewhere, which I assume it's not just
it's been changed for a yacht, hasn't it? You spend it on an island or whatever you do with that kind of amount of money.
Clause 13.2 of the agreement apparently stipulates that the Gallaghers must be supervised around any fruit bowl in a venue.
No plums available.
This podcast was brought to you by The Word.